I'm delighted to be here at the Press Club and delighted to be here in conversation with Gayle Feldman, who has written just a fabulous book. I mean, if you love the island of Manhattan, you need to own this book.
Thank you, Guy.
Is that an endorsement or what? I mean, it is, it is such a wonderful story, not only about Bennett Cerf, but all of Bennett Cerf's authors and his world. It's an intellectual biography of the 20th century. It's a window onto the publishing world. It's just a really smart vehicle for telling a lot of history, and that's what biography is really all about, using the life to tell the larger story. So I want to start out by asking Gayle, sort of to retell the story of how she stumbled into I think it was the Bennett Cerf's personal archive at Columbia University, and I guess that was an aha moment.
Yeah, it was an aha moment. I mean, I grew up in Philadelphia. When I was a kid in Philadelphia, my parents sometimes let me stay up late Sunday night to watch this show that half of America watched, What's My Line, where Bennett Cerf was a panelist. So that was what I knew about Bennett Cerf. And then when I started writing for PW, obviously I came across the fact that Bennett Cerf had been the co-founder and animating spirit of Random House. He was always the first among equals. And I loved doing for PW what's not done anymore, long features about publishing histories. Whenever there was a big anniversary, I did it. And I did one very long feature about the House of Knopf, where I interviewed everybody who worked at Knopf and some who'd gone before, including Alfred A. Knopf Jr., known as Pat, who had founded Athenaeum after he left his parents. And Pat Knopf, after the article was published, said to me, he phoned me and said, "Boy, there's this guy writing my parents' biography, but I think you have a better feel for my parents, and I wish you were the one writing it." And I never forgot that. I had a fellowship at the Columbia Journalism School in that very fateful year, 2001 to 2002. And it was a research fellowship, and I was doing a project comparing best-selling books and prize-winning books and what they said about American book culture. Butler Library, I discovered, had all of these publishing archives and publishing oral histories. And at the same time that year, it was the 75th anniversary of the Modern Library, which Bennett made into an institution. And Random House published a book of the wartime letters between Bennett and his lifelong business partner and best friend, a man named Donald Klopfer. And I read the letters, and I did a piece for PW about the book. And I thought, well, I couldn't do Alfred Knopf, but I think I could do Bennett Cerf. And I think Bennett Cerf had a much bigger life than Alfred Knopf. Because as I realized, he knew everybody in books, TV, Broadway, and Hollywood. And I did a proposal, sent it to a man named Robert Loomis, who'd been at Random House since 1957. He edited every word Maya Angelou ever wrote. He edited William Styron and Edmund Morris and lots of other people.
Wait a minute, how long was the book proposal?
I think it was 25 pages. It was not very long.
Okay.
I did this proposal. I sent it to Bob Loomis. I said, it would be a conflict of interest for Random House to publish this book, but could you tell me, am I on the right track? And Bob phoned me 2 days later and said, I have sent your proposal to Bennett's son, Christopher Cerf, and I am going to publish this book for Random House. So
Wow.
That's how I got involved, and I had no idea what I was getting myself into.
So let's talk a little bit about Bennett's personality. You quote Mia Farrow at one point saying that when you walked into a room and Bennett Cerf was there, it was like stepping into sunlight. That's maybe, was she exaggerating?
She was not. I interviewed her. She really liked Bennett. And she got to know Bennett because the last 6 years of Bennett's life, he had become bosom pals with Frank Sinatra. Strange but true. And Mia, of course, was Frank's girlfriend and then wife. And then no longer wife. And Bennett was around through that whole period. And she said he and his wife were very kind to her. And they made her feel comfortable when a lot of other people did not make her feel comfortable. And Bennett was optimistic. I mean, he joked, he punned all the time. He tried to look on the bright side. Sometimes he didn't shut up. Most people I interviewed anybody I could find who'd known him, so more than 200 people, many of them multiple times. Most people had liked him. Many people loved him. They loved the warmth and the boyishness. But there were people who hated him.
So who hated him?
There was an author named McKinley Cantor, whom he published, who won a Pulitzer for a novel called Andersonville. And when I went to the Library of Congress to look at James Michener's archive and Philip Roth's archive, there was also a McKinley Cantor archive. And when I turned to the box and the folder that had stuff about Random House, the very top paper was a note to future researchers from McKinley Cantor about how much he disliked this pompous ass of a man.
There we go. Guess he didn't like him. So, this biography is not a hagiography. And you talk at one point about his shameless need for attention, approval, and affection. I mean, he was a very needy person, huh?
Yes. He never talked about his mother to his two sons. He didn't talk much about his childhood other than easy stories. And he said in his oral history that, his parents were gloriously in love for their whole lives and wondrously happy. But at the same time, that his mother was the most sensitive woman in the world and always felt slighted. Bennett, I discovered very early on, loved to tell stories, and many of them were not true. He admitted this. He was very open about the story, what was what counted far more than the facts. I mean, he said, I am an unusual specimen. Not only I, but both my parents and all four of my grandparents were born on the island of Manhattan, when he damn well knew that 3 of his grandparents were immigrants. So knowing that, and having had Arthur Gelb very early on say to me, you must remember, Bennett Cerf was a great exaggerator, I knew I had to check and check.
So
and check.
I think you call him at one point the apocryphal man.
I'm not sure whatever. He really did fabricate stuff. I think that
That makes it difficult for the biographer, right? So
it makes it very difficult.
So you had to check every story.
I had to check every story. I did. And I had to try and come up with reasons. You know, he kept diaries his whole life, but they are the diaries of a man who did and did and did, not of a man who reflects. When there were little moments of reflection, they were like gold. I interviewed his confidant once in person and briefly once on the phone. And she said to me, he told me his secrets, dear, but I'm not going to tell them to you. But she also said, she was named Leonora Hornblow, wonderful name. She said, there's a reason why somebody does and does and does, especially if they are very smart and have a very good brain, which Bennett had. Then they don't have to reflect. Then they don't have to think about things, they just do. And he did a lot of doing.
He published, and discovered many authors. But which single discovery do you think was his best? Which author did he actually make and bring into the world that otherwise would not have happened?
Oh my God. That is really difficult because he published so many. But there is a story I will tell about Joyce, of course, because the thing that Bennett and Donald said, they were most proud of doing was, as young men, fighting the court case that allowed Ulysses to be published legally, which was no easy thing to do, because in 1918, when the female editors of the Little Review in Greenwich Village tried serializing Ulysses, they were arrested and sentenced. They had to pay a fine, but they could have gone to prison for 5 years. And it was very clear, you couldn't do Ulysses legally. But then in the late 1920s, things started opening up. When Bennett Cerf started his work in publishing, he began by working for a man named Horace Liveright, who was extraordinary. It was Liveright and his business partner who founded the Modern Library, and Liveright published the first books of Faulkner and Hemingway. He published The Waste Land, the first plays of O'Neill. And Liveright fought for free expression. Bennett idolized many things about Liveright, and that was one of them. So in the late 1920s, when things started to open up, a lawyer named Morris Ernst, who helped found the ACLU, managed to get Radcliffe Hall's lesbian novel, The Well of Loneliness, published legally. So publishers decided they would try to take on Ulysses. Sylvia Beach, of course, an expatriate American bookseller in Paris, published Ulysses in 1922. But that was in Paris. Copies, of course, were brought home in steamer trunks by rich Americans. There was a pirate who did a lot of pornography named Samuel Roth, who pirated Ulysses and sold under the table. Joyce was desperate for legitimacy. And there were several publishers who wanted to do it. William Morrow, Bennett Cerf, and his partner, and a couple of others. Why did Joyce go with Bennett Cerf? Well, I think this city runs on who you know. It does now, and it did then. Before he entered publishing, Bennett, after Columbia, spent a few years working on Wall Street for a stockbroker. after he fought and won the case for Ulysses, and they did it very cleverly. This was Ernst's idea, to fight it just on the basis of one book that they imported, one of Beech's books that they imported from Europe, and that was impounded by customs, rather than Bennett going to the trouble of publishing a few thousand copies and having them burned. Okay, after Bennett had just published Ulysses, he wrote an article for a magazine called Contempo, which was in the archives at Columbia. And in this article, he writes about going to see this man named Robert Castor and another man named Irving Sartorius at this brokerage company. And Mr. Castor was going to go to Paris and wanted to know if Bennett wanted him to convey a message to Joyce. And Bennett says, absolutely, tell him, I'm going to publish his book. I want to publish his book. And it was a very odd thing, because I had no idea, what was this really about? Who was this guy? And what was his role? And in all the Joyce literature, I'd never heard about this guy. So I decided to do some searches in the historic New York Times, ProQuest. And I came up with a wedding announcement for Castor's daughter. And the wedding announcement had the name of her husband. So then I did searches, and I also did telephone directory searches under the husband's name. And there was a number and an address in New York. And I phoned the number and said, I'm writing this biography for Random House of the founder of Random House. And I came across this man, Robert Castor's name, and I think you are related. And she said, this old lady answered, said, I'm his daughter. And I have some letters that might interest you. Would you like to come and see me? Robert Castor's sister, Helen, was married to James Joyce's son, Giorgio. Helen was a New York Jew from an educated family. She was 11 years older than her husband and about 10 years younger than her father-in-law. And she was fascinated by James Joyce, perhaps obsessed. She was also pregnant, and Joyce desperately wanted a grandchild. And she would give birth to Stephen James Joyce. Helen Castor and Robert Castor worked to help Bennett Cerf convince Joyce that he should be the publisher, because Robert Castor was a partner in the stock brokerage where Bennett Cerf had worked after Columbia. I'm not sure he worked there when Bennett worked there, but Bennett had his money in this stock brokerage. And there were telegrams and letters, Joyce's agents wanted him to go with William Morrow, but the Castors said, go with Cerf. Even though Random House had not, they had published the Modern Library, and Joyce, 2 of his books, Dubliner's Portrait of the Artist, were in the Modern Library, so he got royalties. And he'd met Bennett and Donald. They'd gone to Paris. But still, they were only just signing their first books for Random House. O'Neill was the first person they signed. They quickly signed Gertrude Stein. But it was because of the go-betweens that they went with Bennett Cerf.
So what you've just heard is a sort of classic biographer's story about the treasure hunt. And this inevitably happens. This is why biography is so fun. This phone call, discovering the daughter. This is what happens if you push on the door and the door's open and people, give you letters. It's so much fun. So, of course, this is one reason why biography takes so long. So, let's confess how long this book took.
Okay, I signed the contract 23 years ago.
But it's right on time.
Right on time.
No, biography is a lot of work, and the biographer becomes obsessed. And you were sure that, I'm sure 10 years ago, that there were many more archives and people to interview, and you couldn't possibly finish in another year or two, right?
It took forever. I had no idea really what I was letting myself in for. Bennett was capable of dictating 60 letters in a day. And also, he published O'Neill, Joyce, Gertrude Stein, John O'Hara, Faulkner, Ayn Rand, Dr. Seuss, Philip Roth, Styron, and many more. And how could I leave any of those canonical authors out of the book? And he also had this TV career. And his dear friend Moss Hart. There would never have been an Act One if it had not been for three people. Kitty Hart, whom I interviewed a number of times, and Bennett and Phyllis Cerf. Because Moss Hart, was probably manic depressive. He had these awful, awful depressions that he could not work his way out of. And those three people kept him going. And then, probably the greatest book party that there's ever been took place when Act One was published. I had to find somebody who could tell me about that party. And
Of course you did.
The one person, after Kitty died, who I could find, it was Mel Brooks. And he was willing to talk to me because he said, in those years, it was the greatest party I went to. So there we go.
So part of the allure of Bennett Cerf is that he's, this book publisher, he's an intellectual, he's a serious man of literature, but he's also a part of the world of entertainment. So how many years was he on What's My Line?
The broadcast program, 16 years, and then he was on the syndicated show as well. But I must correct you, dear Kai.
Okay.
One thing. Bennett was not and would never pretend to be an intellectual. He was a reader. He read...
Well, isn't that the definition of an intellectual?
No. He read all the time, and he wrote in his diaries what he was reading. And he read not just Random House books, but lots of other books. But he was not an intellectual, and the intellectual establishment, those who were not published by him, looked down on him. Because going on TV in those days, Justin Kaplan and Anne Bernays, when I interviewed them, put it succinctly, it was as though he was selling himself on the street. This was just awful. The New Yorker did a 2-part profile in which the first part goes on and on and on about him and the joke books, that he was just a joke peddler and a buffoon. But if you asked the authors whom he published, and Styron, I talked to him, I talked to Ira Levin, I talked to Cormac McCarthy, whoever I could find, or the editors, Jason Epstein, Nantalese. He was very acute. He had marvelous instincts for people and writers. And he did editorial reports that I found, but he was regarded by many in the intellectual establishment as a buffoon. And I think that is why, if you ask people under the age of 60 today, and I know everybody here is definitely under the age of 60, they have no idea who Bennett Cerf was. Absolutely none. Because the ephemeral fame in his day, he was known by the vast majority of Americans. That went against him. People still revere Knopf, but not Bennett Cerf.
So, drilling down into one little anecdote, I was astonished at one of your anecdotes. Late in Bennett Cerf's life, clearly he opposed the Vietnam War. He was unhappy about what was taking place. And his second wife, Phyllis, had even stronger opinions. And you have this scene where they're having lunch or dinner with Averell Harriman, the Assistant Secretary of War, the former governor of New York, the former ambassador to Moscow, the symbol of the American foreign policy establishment, who was a very powerful and wealthy man. And Phyllis, Bennett's wife, lights into him about Vietnam, which he is deeply involved with, although he's actually a critic at the time, quietly, but not publicly. And suddenly you write that Averell slaps Phyllis, full slaps her in the face. And then you relate Bennett's reaction sitting at the table of this. I found this story to be astonishing for all sorts of reasons. Finish the story. Say what happened.
Yeah, well, Bennett sort of indicates that she deserved it. I mean, he sort of, he is embarrassed. He always wanted to be liked and loved, especially if the person was a powerful person. And Phyllis, she was a difficult woman in many ways. She liked her drink, and she could light into people. I was told the story when I interviewed Peter Duchin, who was the stepson, and was there.
The stepson of Harriman.
Yeah. And I also, the story is written in Duchin's memoirs. And having talked to the man, he sat across from me, and having seen it in writing as well, I thought I'd better use it. And it was an extraordinary moment. I mean, this was late in Bennett's life. It doesn't speak well of anyone involved. But it is what happened. And of course, both the Cerfs had two sons who were of draft age. And Chris did do a stint in the army, in the Guard, and Jonathan taught in an inner city school to avoid going in. But they felt very, very strongly. In fact, I think the only time that Bennett used the word "fuck" in his diary was about Vietnam.
No, it's a wonderful story, and there are many more. So I want to just ask one more question and then open it up to the audience. But can you, talk a little bit about the state of publishing today? I mean, Bennett Cerf was a great publisher, and Random House still exists and thrives, I guess. But what is the state of publishing today, in your opinion?
It was a lot more fun in Bennett Cerf's day. It was a lot more intimate. Bennett Cerf, he worked at knowing the authors who published. The most glorious days of Random House were when it occupied the northern half of the Villard Mansions on Madison Avenue. That was Random House. It just was glorious. Styron said to me, when you went into that building, it was magic. You really felt you were an author and that what you did mattered. And, people would be given tours, authors would be taken around, but also Bennett would, Hollywood stars would be taken around. Miss America, since he judged the contest a few years, would be taken around. And there was, even in the 60s, they did this fabulous party for Andy Warhol, because they were publishing a Warhol book in the late 60s. It was personal publishing, and it was apprenticeship publishing, especially since the pandemic, where people don't go into the office every day. There's not that same feeling in the big houses. I mean, it's corporate. I hope that young people who are in publishing read this book.
Absolutely. That's a good thought. So let's open it up to some questions.
Yes. Okay. Both of you have written books that are extremely well researched with a ton of information that's been available. How do you organize this from a technical standpoint? And what does your desk look like? How do you organize all of this material without getting overwhelmed?
I have two big filing cabinets, each 4 drawers, null filing cabinets. And I have 2 bookcases. One has 8 shelves and the other has about 6 that are entirely devoted to the book. Because having started it so long ago, I have a lot of paper. I have name files, theme files, sex life, psychology, lecture career. And I have chronological files. And I have many tapes on shelves, mini discs, which was what I used then, but whichever archive I give my stuff to will no doubt digitize in a more modern way.
When I started out 40 years ago writing biographies, I used the Xerox machine. I actually bought a portable Xerox machine to take around the presidential archives. They were kind of astonished at that, but that was new technology then. So I started out with paper, but these days on my latest project on Roy Cohn, which is coming out September 1st, I use something called Evernote. And so all of my research is on my iPhone right here. Sorry.
Question. We have a
I do also have.
we have a
In those things, sex and all those things you're talking about, I'm presuming you're putting letters. What do you do now that people only correspond by email?
That was not my problem for this. I mean, I did get email responses, and I printed them and put them into those folders. But I hope I will write another book. And I will have to learn from Kai about Evernote. But yeah, email. What do you think?
Oh, email is going to be a disaster for biographers. I mean, how are people 100 years from now, 200 years from now going to be able to know what we were writing to each other? We're not letter writers anymore. So I have actually saved all my emails from the last 20 years and put them on a hard drive. And I'm going to donate them to, I think, the Princeton Archive, where I have some papers donated already. And but then again, the technology is 100 years from now, are they going to get access, be able to open up that hard drive? That's another question. I don't know.
2 quick questions. If you remember, who wrote that New Yorker profile? And second, how did he get interested in children's books?
A man named Jeffrey Hellman. And I went to see Ved Mehta, who was the only person I could find who had known Jeffrey Hellman. So my portrait of Jeffrey Hellman is quite influenced by what Ved said about him. Children's books. Bennett had a good instinct. So he went after Ted Geisel, a.k.a. Dr. Seuss, after reading the first or second book that he published. But beginner books, which became the powerhouse, I mean, that makes lots and lots of money for Random House. The idea for beginner books was Phyllis Cerf's idea. After The Cat in the Hat, she had this eureka moment. One of her sons was slow to read, and she thought, well, couldn't others learn from Ted Geisel? And couldn't we have a whole series of books like The Cat in the Hat? And that's how beginner books got started.
How did you retain the motivation to finish this book?
Well, maybe I'm crazy. That's always a possibility. I think, first of all, Bob Loomis died 6 years ago. He kept saying, he said, just keep writing, just keep writing. Then at a certain point, just keep writing, but it's going to be too long. Before he died, he and I started cutting it, but he died. And in the end, I had to pay someone on the outside to help me cut it because Random House said it would take up too much of any editor's time. So, any in-house editor's time. So that is indeed what I had to do. I think I felt that books have been super important to me. I was the bookworm, quiet kid. And my mother died when I was in high school, and books kind of saved me. And this guy, I mean, I'd read so many authors that he published in the Modern Library. And I was kind of like Lucy Manette in A Tale of Two Cities. I felt I had to recall this guy to life, that he should be remembered for what he did. So many people do bad things and are well remembered. And more than anyone, I mean, yeah, he had his feet of clay. He did some shameful things, but he made Random House. And that was worth writing about.
We who watched What's My Line every week, they seemed like the very picture of affability. And I'm wondering what Dorothy Kilgallen and Arlene Francis and John Charles Daly, what did they all think of one another off camera?
Okay. All right. Well, they didn't much like Dorothy, that's for sure. Bennett did say, well, Dorothy, could be very nice. But she also, wasn't off the record. I mean, she blabbed about things that were said behind the scenes in her gossip column, which did not make others happy. And her marriage was not a happy one. Arlene Francis married to Martin Gable, a fine actor whose career was ruined by the blacklist. So that, too, was not the happiest of marriages. Martin Gable was an alcoholic. And Arlene, was like Bennett. She did and did and did. She was super bright. The radio show and I think the column and all this stuff, as well as What's My Line. But Arlene and Marty and Bennett and Phyllis were friends. In fact, Bennett and Phyllis had this 43 or 45 acre amazing estate in Mount Kisco. I went several times to see it. It was just like paradise. And Bennett, I sold a bit of land or arranged for Arlene and Marty to buy so they could construct a house on the edge of Bennett's property. And I wish that I had been at the party for Frank Sinatra and Truman Capote just after In Cold Blood was published. And it was in Mount Kisco in the summer under a tent, and there were fireworks, and Sinatra sang for an hour.
Given everything you've lived through and what you've seen and what you know about people that you will never tell those tales, what advice can you give to people like me that are in this business and trying to come up and that would hopefully one day would be mentioned with people like you?
Well, I think you have to be fair. You have to understand that when you're writing about other people, what if somebody were writing about you? So you have to be fair. There's so much snark these days. And I think you have to try and find the facts, and you have to tell the truth. Even if it's painful, even if it doesn't make for such a nice, well-rounded story, you have to tell the truth. You have to try your best.
Let me just say that I'm the first to admit that my biographies are subjective. It's my story about Robert Oppenheimer, or my story about Mac Bundy or Roy Cohn. And it's my biases. And, you know, I try to tell the truth, but I know I'm telling one piece of it. So.
Yeah, but I think, I mean, I did something that some people argued against. Bennett Cerf's sons were very helpful to me. This is not an authorized biography, but they lent me photographs, papers. They put up with me interviewing them many times over many years. I sent each of them a galley and said, you better read this. If there's anything wrong, you better tell me. And, you know, there's still time. I can make changes. Because I felt very strongly they should see the book before the world saw the book. And I think one of the most important things through this whole 23 years was when Jonathan Cerf said to me, you got all the big things right. Go ahead. And sure, I am telling the story. It is through me. Somebody else would tell the story differently. Absolutely. Kai is right.
I'm just thinking about, as you talk about the range of authors that he published in terms of, and diversity in the true meaning of diversity, in terms of backgrounds, and in terms of like children's authors, and that point about him not being regarded, and maybe him not regarding himself as an intellectual. And I think about the publishing space right now and all the consolidation and all the kind of becoming more monolithic and less willing to take risks. I mean, that's what authors are hearing, definitely, in terms of, you know, from publishers and from agents and, you know, all of that. So I'm just curious about, I mean, I guess I'm asking you to speculate a bit, given that you've been immersed in this for 23 years and or more. Would Bennett Cerf be able to be, you know, helm a house right now in this climate? I'm just curious about your thoughts on that.
I think, you know, it's not easy publishing today. Yes, lots of corporate pressures. And don't forget Amazon, the effect that Amazon has on everything. There are a lot of small, terrific houses. You know, places like Grey Wolf, Milkweed, even, you know, Grove Atlantic is a bit bigger, but Melville House. I mean, they take chances. That's, you know, where I would go. Unfortunately, what then tends to happen is when a writer makes it, they are scooped up by lots more money from the big houses. Not everybody. Some people remain with the smaller houses. But that's the way it goes. I mean, Cormac McCarthy was discovered in the slush pile by a young woman. The editor who published him was named Albert Erskine. He published, I think, 4 or 5, I can't remember how many now, of McCarthy's novels. They did not make money. Erskine was Ralph Ellison and Michener and Faulkner's last editor. And he basically said, if I can't keep publishing this guy, I'm going to quit. So they kept publishing McCarthy. And I think it was the 5th book that finally was All the Pretty Horses. But that could not happen today.
I'm not sure if this is one question or two. What are your favorite quips from Bennett Cerf? And, or, what did you learn about writing and editing from him?
Well, Bennett believed in not wasting time. and really only keeping in your head the things you needed to keep in your head. I cut 500 pages out of this book. It's a mammoth book, yes. I mean, the text is 800 pages, but 500 came out. I mean, the Ulysses chapter was twice the length, and Bob Loomis thought it was a great chapter. The epilogue, which goes from Bennett's death to today, and the sorry tale of what happened, it's called Revolving Doors. That was twice as long. I didn't cut any chapter out, but they were all made much slimmer, and I think for the most part are better for it.
Good outside edit.
Yes, I mean, Lewis and I started the cutting. Then I actually had one person for a year who helped me. She had she was very good in many ways, but she liked the book too much, and we were not cutting enough. So we very amicably parted company, and we're still friends. And then a guy named Paul Golub helped me. And Paul was capable of wielding the hatchet and the scalpel. But once Paul finished, I then, and we had disagreements, and there were things that he said, you ought to cut. And I didn't cut. But I found other things to cut. And then I did a final round of cuts beyond that. And Paul said, because he's come to a few of my talks, somebody asked about the cutting, and he said, well, you can cut 10% of any book. But he said, so, I did that, but then the rest was meat, and it was very hard. Thank you
great.
so much for coming. I am honored and privileged to speak before such a distinguished audience. Thank you for inviting me.